All right, guys, so here we are ready to go into section 1.2, which is on unifying themes of biology. Again, we're going to write down our key concept, which is unifying themes connect concepts from many fields of biology. And when we learn about biology, if you remember correctly, bio meant life, logi meant the study of. So in biology, we have many different fields, many different categories that you can study because the world is full of living things. And each of those things can be broken down into separate categories. And each of those things interact with their environments in different ways. And that's a study all into itself. So there's many different things that you can study in biology. Now this is going to give you an overview of all of those different little sections, and each one of those little sections we will cover further in depth later on during the year. So this is just meant as a little overview on these themes that are going to come up again and again as we study biology. Again, here's our vocabulary list. You do not need to write down our list. I have that for you in our weekly overview folder. Our vocabulary for this PowerPoint are organism, cell, metabolism, DNA, system, ecosystem, homeostasis, evolution, and adaptation. And a lot of those words you already know, and some of them we're going to learn as we go. Again, please don't write this down in your notes. This is the main ideas, which you can find in our weekly overview folder. And some of the main ideas for this section are all organisms share certain characteristics. All levels of life have systems of related parts. Structure and function are related in biology. Organisms must maintain homeostasis to survive in diverse environments. And evolution explains both the unity and diversity of life. And again, we're going to talk about these things. Lastly, here are essential questions. You'll be writing these down at the end because you're going to be doing some assignments with these. So don't worry about writing the questions now unless you want to write them at the top and then save some room to answer them later on. So the first one, what characteristics do all living things share? Second, describe a biological system. What is homeostasis and why is it important? How are structure and function related in biology? And how does evolution lead to both the diversity and the unity of life? So if we think about this, we talked about a species in the last PowerPoint, and the species was a specific type of living thing, right? All the same kind. Like if you were here in school and you're walking around, you see all the people. All people belong to the same species. We all belong to the species Homo sapien. That's one population, one group or type of living thing. Well, every single one of you is a living being all upon yourself, just one single thing. So an organism is any individual living thing. So you're an organism. You belong to the species Homo sapien because we're all humans. Same thing with like a fruit fly, a frog, a bat. They all belong to a specific species or a group that are all the same, but each individual is an organism. And all organisms share certain characteristics. And in order to be classified as alive, you have to have all of these characteristics. And the following are the main characteristics that all living things share. Now we're going to go through this list with you on different slides. Plus, at the end, you are going to have an assignment based on these characteristics. So let me just read through them real quick for you. The first one is cellular organization. The next one, reproduction. Heredity, which means DNA, evolution or evolve, growth and development, metabolism, responsiveness, and then one of our vocabulary words, homeostasis. We'll get into what that actually means later on. So our first characteristic that all living things share is the cellular organization. And all that means is that all living things are organized by cells. And a cell is the basic unit of life, and it's the smallest unit that is capable of all of life's functions. That means that we do have some living things, some organisms that are only one cell big. They're still alive. They do everything that all living things do. They're just teeny tiny little things. And we call those unicellular organisms, single-celled organisms. Uni for one. They're only made up of one cell. And then we have bigger things like us, where we're made of many, many, many different cells. So we are considered multicellular organisms. Multi for many. So if we look at those definitions, unicellular, composed of only one cell, and multicellular, made of more than one cell. Our next characteristic is reproduction. And all organisms reproduce, which means they make more of the same kind. So when we have babies, we have more human babies. When cats have babies, they have more cat or feline babies. And there's two types of reproduction. We have asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. We're going to go into this a little bit more in depth when we actually cover reproduction later on. But just know, in asexual reproduction, we have one parent. And those babies, the offspring, look absolutely identical to that parent in every single way. It's like making a little clone of itself. And usually this is true for little single-celled or unicellular organisms. They start off as one cell and they grow to a certain point where they split apart and form two identical cells. Okay, so they're absolutely identical and we only have one parent. And then sexual reproduction includes two parents. And in this, the offspring or the baby have a combination of traits or genes from both parents. They look a little bit like dad and a little bit like mom. So that's sexual reproduction. Our next theme is heredity. And in heredity, all living things pass on their characteristics in the form of genes from parents to offspring. And genes are the set of inherited instructions, or the sets of DNA. And we use that DNA to make proteins. And those proteins are what make you, you. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And that's the genetic material that contains all the instructions needed to determine a species' characteristics. Your DNA is different than a frog's DNA. It's made up of the same chemicals, but it contains instructions for making you into a human. And a frog's DNA contains the instructions for making him into a frog. So all of those things are contained in the DNA. Now, every once in a while, there's changes to DNA, and some of that changes cause things to survive better. Some of those changes can cause problems, and sometimes those changes we don't notice at all. Anytime there's a little change to DNA, we call that a mutation. And again, when we talk about our section on DNA, we will cover all of these different things. So evolution, that's our next characteristic. And evolution actually explains the unity and diversity of life, and all living things as a species evolve. And they evolve very, very slowly. It's small little changes in that DNA that enable something to survive better. That's what I was talking about with those mutations. Sometimes those mutations in DNA or those changes in DNA allow something to survive better. And then those changes get passed on from generation to generation to generation. And so evolution is a change in living things over time. And those inherited traits or the genes that make up a population of species changes. And it takes a very, very long time to see those changes. Now let's think about this. Let's say we have a group of grasshoppers, and those grasshoppers are living out in the green grass. And some grasshoppers have a gene that makes them a green color. And some grasshoppers have a gene that makes them a brown color. Well, if they're all out there living in a nice field that's green and growing, they're hopping along, which grasshoppers are going to get eaten first? The green ones or the brown ones? Hopefully you said the brown ones, because the brown ones are going to be more easily picked out by predators because they don't have the camouflage to match the green grass. Now, slowly over time, that population is going to change, that we see more green grasshoppers because they're surviving better and they're able to pass on that green gene. And over time, those brown grasshoppers are going to die out. Every once in a while, a brown one will be born, but because he stands out more, he's going to get eaten more. And then eventually that population would change where it's all green grasshoppers. And that change, those changes that enable things to survive better, is called natural selection. So organisms with genes that are favorable are more likely to survive. We call that survival of the fittest. And that was a change in the DNA that gets passed on. And it was a beneficial trait for those grasshoppers to be green because they wouldn't get eaten. They have camouflage. And so adaptations are beneficial inherited traits that are passed on to future generations. And this is what actually causes evolution to occur. These small changes over time enable things to survive better, so they pass on their genes. And so evolution occurs through natural selection of adaptations. And this evolution accounts for both the diversity and the unity of life. All of us are connected. We're all made of DNA. We've all come from different things, but we evolved, we changed over time to survive better. And if you remember diversity, diversity just means that things look different. We have different forms of things. And so, yet we're all made of DNA, we're all made of the same chemicals, but the evolution, those small changes in DNA has made us all different. And again, that's one of the essential questions. So when you get to the end and you've got to answer that, if you need to come back to the slide, take a look at the slide and repeat what I just told you. Next characteristic, all living things grow and develop. And that means that they become bigger and become more complex. And all living things have a lifespan, an aging process. They go through this. Some things live for a very short period of time. Other things live for a really long time. And it all depends on what kind of species you are. Next characteristic, all organisms use energy to grow, to move, and to process information. And this is called metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions that get carried out in an organism that allows to break up or build up or break down materials. So if you think about metabolism, what do we need in order to function? Well, our bodies need food. We break apart that food to get energy so that our body can run all of the things that it does to keep us alive. Plants do this too. Plants actually take in the sunlight. They go through a process called photosynthesis in order to make their own food. And so they capture that solar energy to make molecules, and those molecules are their food. So all living things have to break down or metabolize different materials in order to get the energy that they need to survive. Next characteristic, responsiveness. And all organisms respond. Like if you hear a loud noise, you're going to turn towards that noise and wonder what happens. If someone comes over and taps you, you're going to respond. So all organisms respond to things called stimuli. And stimuli is just plural for stimulus. And a stimulus is anything in the environment that causes an organism to react. And some examples of that are light, temperature, odor, sound, water, chemicals, anything can really be a stimulus. So responsiveness is that all organisms respond to light or to stimulus. And if you think about this, even plants respond. If you put a plant on a windowsill and it starts to grow, it is going to turn towards that sunlight. You can move that plant around and face it the other way, but eventually it's going to start to turn back towards that sunlight. It's responding to stimulus. The next thing, organisms must maintain homeostasis to survive in diverse environments. So homeostasis, this is a very confusing topic. We will discuss it several times throughout this course. Homeostasis is basically, well, let me read the definition. Homeostasis is the maintenance of constant internal conditions. What that really means is that all of us have some kind of normal range for our bodies to function, like a normal temperature, a normal pH of our stomach acid. We need to have a normal amount of water to maintain our body systems. So homeostasis is that normal point. Now, if something goes out of range where it's not quite normal, our body works to bring it back to where it needs to be, okay? And that's called the regulation of homeostasis. So think about like our temperature. If we get really hot, what happens? Well, we start to sweat. Sweat cools us down so that we can go back to that normal temperature. Okay, same thing if you get cold, what happens? Your body shivers and you shake a little bit to warm yourself up. Okay, So homeostasis is how our body actually controls those normal things, what it needs to do to maintain a normal range of different systems. So here's my example here. Humans have a specific body temperature that's considered normal. So if you get too hot, you sweat. If you get too cold, you shiver and tremble in order to increase your body temperature. So homeostasis, again, is just that normal range and how your body actually regulates itself. And behaviors and adaptations can actually help maintain homeostasis. So things that live in very cold environments have adaptations that enable them to survive better, to keep their temperature in the right spot. Like this picture of the polar bear, it can help maintain homeostasis in cold climates because it's got specialized hair to do that. Now, all levels of life have system of related parts. So a system is an organized group of related parts that interact to form a whole. And if you think about this, a basic example would be a car. And you can think about all the parts of a car. Okay, we've got the engine, we've got the wheels, we have the bearings, we have the seats, we've got the fuel tank, all sorts of the car. Now, even if you had all the parts that belong to the car, if they weren't put together in the correct order, your car wouldn't work. You'd have a car that didn't function. Only when all the parts are put together correctly will it work. So you can think about the car as being a system. All the things need to be working correctly. And just like our bodies are made up of cells. All of those cells need to function together to form larger pieces called tissues. Those tissues come together to form larger things called organs. And then all those organs work together to form all the organ systems, like our circulatory system, our respiratory system, our nervous system. All those pieces need to be working together. And then once you bring all those systems together, they need to work in unison so that they can function and run the whole organism. So all of our body systems work together to keep us alive. So some examples of biological systems are listed below. So a cell is a system of chemicals and processes. A body system includes all the different organs that interact, and the outside environments, an ecosystem. If we think about an ecosystem, it includes all the living parts and the non-living parts that interact. And so we have a community of organisms and their physical environments. Everything needs to work in unison together to maintain homeostasis, that normal range. And biologists study many different systems. Now, when we start to talk more about some of these topics, we're going to talk about structure and function, and they're completely related in biology. In structure, we talk about how something is built. Function means how something actually works, the job that it does. And always the structure of something determines its job, its function. Okay, and I've got some examples down there for you. But just keep in mind that structure and function are related. The structure of something, how it's built, determines its job, its function. All right, so that leads me to our essential questions. Please write these down and try to answer them in your notebook. If you're having any questions answering them, message me, ask me questions so that I can give you further information to make sure that you're staying doing what you need to do in order to be successful. So again, write them down, answer them. If you're still having questions, let me know. And then that's it for section 1.2. You do have an assignment for this, which will be posted on Schoology as well. So you'll see that in the next thing you need to do.